some sauce?
Sometimes there are threats that even the greatest heroes can't handle alone. Monsters, villains, and disasters that can't be faced by the faint of heart. Cause at the end of the day, the ones that stop the destruction, make a difference, and save the day are the brave and the bold. Pack your utility belts and raise your hammers of justice. It's time for DC-cember. Greetings fanboys and fangirls, I'm Erod and I'm the Blockbuster Buster. I put a lot of thought into what show I was gonna end DC-cember with, as I wanted it to be a show that played tribute to the DC universe as a whole. Of course, the first show that comes to mind is Justice League, but I have already done a super duper honest review of Justice League. And then I realized that only one show truly showed its love to the DC universe in its entirety. Only one show dared to explore nearly every corner of the original universe without shame or trepidation. Only one show played tribute to the world's greatest superheroes in their full splendor. Batman, the Brave and the Bold. Now, before I jump into this delightfully underrated show, I should mention that there was a show that came before Batman, the Brave and the Bold and Justice League that actually played tribute to the entire DC universe. And that was the legendary superpowers team, Galactic Guardians. A lot of people confuse this for Super Friends, as it was produced by the same studio and it had a lot of the same voiceover actors. Hell, some even consider this to be the final season of Super Friends. To that, I say nay. Believe it or not, like many cartoons from the 80s, the initial purpose of this show was to sell toys. More specifically, Kenner's Superpowers toy line. Guys, this is my childhood right here. I had almost every figure in this toy line, and I must have spent the better part of my preteen years playing with these toys and reenacting my favorite stories from the comics and TV shows. I didn't need a tie-in show to make me want these toys. As a matter of fact, I actually didn't know about the Superpowers TV series until they started airing the reruns on Cartoon Network in 1993. Basically, this was a more serious and dignified take on the Super Friends. There were no stupid, goofy sidekicks, the politically correct heroes were present, but the roles were minimized, and there were only 2 silly episodes in the entire run of the show. To be perfectly honest, they might as well have called this the Firestorm and Cyborg Action Hour, as the show mostly focused on the two of them, since they were the 2 hip young heroes. But they're both great characters, so I didn't mind. This show is best known for having 2 great episodes that paved the way for all the awesome DC shows of today. The first episode is The Fear. Batman and Robin chase after the Scarecrow, when suddenly, the villain runs down the very same alley where Batman's parents were murdered. Batman hesitates for just a moment, and the Scarecrow takes advantage and hits Batman with his Fear Ray, making Batman have a flashback of that terrible evening. And yes, this is the first time Batman's origin was ever depicted in a cartoon. And while it is a very G-rated version, it was still very bold of them to even reference this in a children's show from 1985. This episode was written by none other than Alan Burnett, who went on to be the story editor for Batman the Animated Series. It's good to know that even back then there were DC fans in the trenches. And last but not least, we have the death of Superman. Guys, This episode was released almost 7 years before Superman actually died in the comics. In the show, Superman is mysteriously killed while exploring a planet with Firestorm. Firestorm blames himself for the passing of Superman cause he felt that he should have been there to help Superman fight whatever it was that killed him. And he also feels that Superman is so important that he should have been the one to die in his place.
How'd you like to go down in history as the guy who failed Superman?
While this episode might have a predictable happy ending, it handles the passing of this great character very, very well. As you see the heroes grieving and trying to figure out what they are going to do without Superman, as he has left a big void in their team. The absolute best analogy for this is the scene where the heroes regretfully visit Superman's home, the Fortress of Solitude, in order to get Superman's effects in order and figure out what they are going to do with his belongings. And it takes the combined strength of Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and Cyborg to lift and use the key to the Fortress of Solitude, a key that Superman can usually lift and use on his own. All in all, this show might have its flaws, but it was a mass improvement to the Super Friends, and a good start to a new beginning of great DC shows. I give it a 6. It's definitely above average. If you get a chance, give it a watch. You might be surprised.
One scared scarecrow.
He should feel quite relieved once he's behind bars.
So will all of Gotham City.
Now let's dive right into The Brave and the Bold, starting with the plot. Most people who have watched this show become idiotically fixated with the portion of the title that says Batman. They see that the show doesn't resemble any of the past Batman shows, and then they rubber stamp it as a stupid kids show.
I always felt Batman was best suited in the role of gritty urban crime detective, but now you guys have him up against Santas and Easter bunnies? I'm sorry, but that's not my Batman.
But the show is not called Batman. The show is called Batman, the Brave and the Bold, after the famed Silver Age comic, which is most famous for having different DC heroes team up in almost every issue. Batman is not necessarily the protagonist of the show, but more of a binding theme. Unlike other superhero shows where the guest star character invades the protagonist's world, this show sees Batman visiting the distinct settings of other DC heroes, making this a beautiful exploration of the DC universe. Lastly, but most importantly, while this show may include the modern iterations of some of the DC characters, it still takes place in the Silver Age. For those of you who don't know, throughout the 60s, comics became a part of an era known as the Silver Age. For DC Comics, this was a time where wacky sci-fi nonsense was fully embraced. After all, sci-fi was becoming big in popular media. Time travel, space travel, and alternate dimensions are extremely common tropes during this time. And as Linkara so eloquently pointed out during our Batman 1966 review, the Silver Age was goofy. Superman had a team of super pets, Batman had a zebra suit, and Flash had a time-traveling treadmill. See, I told you time travel was common. Just because this is light-hearted and not the super serious hyper-stylized fare of the modern age, it doesn't make this any less of a vital part of DC Comics history, and definitely worth the time and effort that the creators put into adapting this into a cartoon.
Justice wins the day thanks to The Brave and the Bold.
Cast and characters. Even though the show celebrates the entire DC universe, one of its mission statements was to focus on the characters that don't get the spotlight that often. Like for example, Blue Beetle, played by Will Friedle, Plastic Man, played by Tom Kenny, The Atom, played by James Sy, Booster Gold, played by Tom Everett Scott, and Green Arrow and Green Lantern Guy Gardner, both played by James Arnold Taylor. I can honestly say that everyone portrayed their characters with skilled accuracy, and I was very pleased with the way in which all were presented. But because this show has such an erratic format, very much like the Silver Age, very few characters were developed further than their standard character traits and gimmicks. In fact, even though this show has such a huge star-studded cast, there were only 3 truly breakthrough characters in the entire show. So let's discuss them briefly. Batmite, played by Paul Reubens. Now, for those of you who don't know, Batmite is an all-powerful imp from the 5th dimension. In the comics and cartoons, he was always portrayed as a meddling little jerk, who would appear to Batman and try to help him by using his 5th dimensional magic. But he would always end up sabotaging him by accident. Here, Batmite, is a fanboy, which explains his obsession with Batman, as well as his little costume. He's actually aware that he is in a TV show. He constantly breaks the fourth wall, makes references to other incarnations of Batman. He knows the full bios of all of Batman's rogues, and you should see all the sweet bat swag back in his man cave. Oh yeah. While the original Batmite wanted to have adventures with Batman, this one does what all true fanboys wish they could do: meddle with Batman stories and try to make them better. Of course, this is always met with disastrous results. While he might not be able to improve Batman, as Batman needs no improvement, Batmite is so powerful, he can even momentarily make Scooby-Doo cool. Jinkies.
Aquaman, played by John DiMaggio.
When I was a kid, Aquaman was this fun-loving adventurer whose only flaw was that he was literally a fish out of water. He didn't belong in our world, but he still loved it and would fight to defend it at any cost. It was in the late 80s or early 90s where he suddenly changed into the reserved regal badass that we know him as, which isn't bad. But for many years, I thought I was crazy and that I had just imagined the happier version of Aquaman. Until this show.
Aquaman was cool again.
Hell yeah! Not only is Arthur one of my favorite superheroes, but he is most definitely my favorite character on the show. The goal was to make Aquaman fun again, and no voiceover actor brings as much fun and energy into a role like John DiMaggio.
Fine with me, Lobster Man. As long as you remember who the king of the sea is. I don't want to bring out a whale to whoop your ass.
In this show, Aquaman is pretty much an idiot savant. He's not very good at much except being a superhero. When superheroing is involved, this switch just goes off in his head and he is perfect. In fact, you could say that he's outrageous!
Outrageous! Outrageous! It's outrageous!
Outrageous?
Outrageous! What has gotten into you, man? Alana is alive! Ran is alive! You're alive! And where there is life, there's always hope!
But we're outgunned.
So what? We don't even use guns!
The Eye is invulnerable.
All the better to prove we are true heroes!
Alana is their captive.
For now, this isn't the end. It's an opportunity. Most men wait their entire lives in vain for a moment like this. A chance to matter. A call to adventure. Adam, answer that call.
Batman, played by Diedrich Bader.
I remember when this casting was announced, a close personal friend of mine ran up to me and said, "Oh no, Erod, they casted that goofy guy from the Drew Carey Show as Batman." To which I responded, "No, they got the awesome actor who played Hoss Delgado on Billy and Mandy to play Batman." That quote put many of my friends at ease. I'm not gonna sit here and make outrageous claims that Diedrich's performance is as good as Kevin Conroy's or Michael Keaton's or Bruce Greenwood's. But hey, those are tough acts to follow. And in spite of that, Diedrich still did a kick-ass job. Cause guess what? Batman is still Batman. Even with all the goofy sci-fi insanity around him, he's still the dark, brooding vigilante detective.
One of you knows something. And I've got all night to find out who.
As opposed to being a gullible jackass. Catwoman betrayed me? No way. Diedrich might not be as intense as some of the past actors who have played this role, but he is just right for the tone of this show.
Phantom Stranger, this had better be important.
Very. I'm alarmed at the way you're conducting this investigation.
Go haunt a house. I'm busy.
Now, the basic structure of a Brave and the Bold episode consisted of a cold opening, which would show Batman and a fellow superhero about to wrap up an adventure. This would be followed by the opening credits, and then we would go into the main story. I like this format for two reasons. Number one, it's pretty much the format of a lot of comics from the Golden Age and Silver Age. where the comics would often have a backup story that would follow the cover story. And number 2, the fact that most of the episodes were standalone made it easier for casual viewers to just jump in and enjoy the show at any point in the show's run. Incidentally, my favorite cold opening is the one attached to Bold Beginnings, which sees Batman team up with Space Ghost. If I would have seen this as a kid, my brain would have exploded. And this is a legit crossover, as they not only perfectly recreated the classic 60s Hanna-Barbera animation, but they got Gary Owens to return as the voice of Space Ghost. Seeing the Phantom of the Spaceways side by side with the Dark Knight gave me a geekgasm of biblical proportions. While this show had 3 seasons and 3 major story arcs, the arcs didn't really coincide with each season, so I'm not going to look at each season individually. Instead, I will be looking at the more notable individual episodes, starting with the bad ones, because as much as I love this show, it ain't perfect. But before we get to that, let's talk about an episode that kind of falls in the middle, which just so happens to be the most popular episode in the entire series, Mayhem of the Music Meister. This is the musical episode of Brave and the Bold. Basically, the Music Meister, played by Neil Patrick Harris, has the power to hypnotize his victims and make them sing. So he plans to expand his hypnotic reach, and thus, Batman and Black Canary, played by Grey DeLisle, must stop him. Now, when Brave and the Bold started to air, I was just a casual viewer, and suddenly a lot of my acquaintances started to rave about this episode. People started to dress like the Music Meister at conventions, and the episode was even nominated for an Emmy. So as soon as I got the chance, I checked it out, and quite frankly, I didn't see what all the hype was about. All I saw was an overly simplistic plot in which the story facilitated the musical numbers as opposed to the musical numbers facilitating the story. But I figured, hey, maybe it was just overhyped. I'll give it another chance. A year later, I watched it again. After a second viewing, I came to the conclusion that I fucking hate this episode. Now, before I say anything else, I should mention that one of our resident Music Meisters, Paul, already reviewed this episode and gave it a glowing review. So if you want to hear a positive perspective on this episode from someone who is better versed than me when talking about music, then I highly recommend you check out his video. And look, I love Neil Patrick Harris and Grey DeLisle. They are fantastic singers, but personally, I can't stand the majority of the songs in this damn episode.
It's a good thing we've got Arkham, cause he really drives us fast. Drives us fast, drives us fast. He really drives us fast.
Yeah, this fucking song drives me bats. The only song that I kind of like is Death Trap, which ironically, Paul says is the worst song in the episode. So there you go. And I know what most of you are thinking. Erod, it's obvious why you hate this episode. It's cause you don't like musicals. Well, that's partially true. Yes, I am not a musical enthusiast, but I don't hate all musicals. One of my all-time favorite films, The Nightmare Before Christmas, is a musical. I love Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog. I consider the musical episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Once More with Feeling, to be one of the absolute best episodes of that show. And it's not like I have anything against Batman singing, as I consider the moment in Justice League Unlimited, when Batman has to sing in order to reverse a curse that was placed on Wonder Woman, to be one of the absolute greatest moments of that show.
Am I blue? Am I blue? Ain't these tears in my eyes telling you?
Beautiful. And you'll keep your part of the bargain? A deal's a deal. He can stop now. Not on your life.
I just find this particular episode to be completely unappealing. And I find myself perplexed that this is the episode that gets all the attention.
Was the singing really necessary?
Now, does this mean that I think that all the music on Batman the Brave and the Bold is bad? No. Grey and Blue, performed by John DiMaggio as Vigilante in Night of the Batman, is fucking awesome.
Grey and blue, grey and blue, the man from
the gray and blue.
And the Birds of Prey theme from the band episode is also great.
All the boys can always save the day. No one does it better. No one does it better than the Birds of Prey.
Yes, Batman the Brave and the Bold has a band episode. Let's go ahead and talk about that one. The Mask of Matches Malone. Batman has to go undercover as Matches Malone to recover the cloak of Nefertiti, which Two-Face plans to sell at a supervillain auction. So Batman recruits the help of the Birds of Prey, Black Canary and Huntress, and also Catwoman, who was originally trying to steal the cloak. During a quick skirmish, Batman gets clocked in the head and loses his memory, and actually believes that he is Matches Malone. He steals the cloak, which apparently grants the wearer 9 extra lives, and using his newfound immortality, Matches becomes the most notorious criminal in Gotham, leaving the Birds and Catwoman desperate to find a way to stop him. This episode was written by none other than Gail Simone, the actual writer of the Birds of Prey comic. The premise is interesting and the performances are great. So why was this episode banned? If you think it was banned because it depicts Batman being killed repeatedly, then you would be wrong. The reason it was banned was because the Birds allegedly use way too much sexual innuendo when comparing the male heroes to themselves during their song.
Green Lantern has his special ring. Pretty strong, that little thing. Blue Beetle's deeds are really swell. But who will bring him out of his shell? Flash's foes, they finish last. Too bad sometimes he's just too fast.
Okay, I'll admit it. The innuendos are there, but it's pretty light, especially considering all the adult humor that shows like Animaniacs and Powerpuff Girls got away with.
Don't you realize you've entered the fiery realm of Hades?
Hades? Boy, they were right. It didn't have a chance.
Well, personally, I think the song is great. It's catchy, it's upbeat, and it's performed flawlessly by Grey DeLisle, Tara Strong, and Nika Futterman. Alright, enough stalling. Let's jump right into...
The worst episodes.
Adapting concepts from the Silver Age into a coherent cartoon series is no easy task, so there was no way the creators were always gonna get it right. So let's start this off with Clash of the Metal Men. Batman meets the Metal Men, a group of superpowered robots with insidiously abrasive childlike personalities. The villains of this piece are the Gas Gang. Let that tasteless humor commence.
So pardon us if we're a little gassy.
So the gang's plan is to kidnap the Metal Men's creator, Doc Magnus, and force him to build them bodies. Now Magnus is supposed to be a robotics genius, and yet he builds them the most ridiculously impractical bodies ever. And did I mention the tasteless humor?
Best seat in the house, Batman.
Thanks. I'll stand.
My God, that was awkward. The Crisscross Conspiracy. Rich bitch Katrina Moldoff decides she wants to be a crime fighter, cause she was bored, I guess. Suddenly, the Riddler unmasks her in public, ending her crime fighting career. A few years later, she aims to get revenge by switching bodies with Batman. Okay, 2 things. Thing 1. This was already the premise of a Star Trek episode, The Turnabout Intruder, and quite frankly, Star Trek did it better. And number 2. It was the Riddler who ruined her life. Why is she going after Batman again? And yes, she eventually aims to kill the Riddler, but technically she could have done that in her own body. The highlight of this episode is Diedrich Bader playing Katrina. It's pretty damn hilarious.
Why am I not surprised? We're going to extinguish Riddler, and do you know why? Because I hate him, hate him, hate him!
Not to mention a great reference to Some Like It Hot at the end of the episode.
I'm sure gonna miss Katrina.
You do know, Faust, that was me in her body.
Well, nobody's perfect.
The Malicious Mr. Mime. In my opinion, the worst kind of episodes are the ones that have great potential but fail miserably. Captain Marvel's introductory episode, The Power of Shazam, is excellent, and I highly recommend it, especially if you are unfamiliar with Captain Marvel and his mythology. this episode could have been an awesome sequel to Power of Shazam, but it's not. The episode starts great with all the Captain Marvel villains teaming up to take down the Marvel family and take over Fawcett City. Fucking epic. And then things unravel when Batman is turned into Bat Baby. And yes, this is straight out of the Silver Age. It's just that the concept was not used effectively. The plot device of making Batman younger is nothing new. It was used incredibly well in the Justice League Unlimited episode, Kid Stuff.
It's not a race.
Here, not only is it not used well, but it's not even the main focus of the episode, which actually is Mr. Mind creating dissension in the Marvel family, making the heroes argue among themselves as opposed to fighting the bad guys. Something else they already did in Justice League. The difference is, in that show when the League falls apart, each member tries to solve the crisis at hand individually. In this episode, the heroes just sit around and stew in their own juices like a bunch of bratty, irresponsible assholes, while the villains ransack the city. It's just lame. Emperor Joker. Another episode with infinite potential, based on the crossover storyline in which the Joker gains the godlike powers of Mr. Mitzias Pitlick. The difference is that here it is Batmite's powers that he acquires. So what does the Joker do with this amazing godlike powers? He sings.
You can be a goody two-shoes till the end of your days. You can listen to them say crime never pays.
I don't think I need to say anything else here, other than...
And you are...
Harley Quinn.
Unacceptable! Joker the Vile and the Villainous. Again, another example of infinite potential gone to shit. The idea here is brilliant. An episode of Batman the Brave and the Bold which focuses on the villains teaming up with the Joker, who is brilliantly played by Jeff Bennett. We start off great, with the Joker first teaming up with the Misfit during the cold opening. Then we go to a redesigned version of the opening credits, followed with yet another supervillain crossover with the Fisherman. And then things get really dull really fast, as the rest of the episode is about the Joker trying to help a washed up supervillain called the Weeper regain his dignity. What? Why? The Joker almost murders the Misfit using a nuclear weapon during the cold opening, and now he wants to help some sad has-been we've never heard of regain his dignity? Where's the logic in that, Spock? And now for the absolute worst episode in the series, Powerless. One of the best aspects of this show is how all the characters, no matter how prominent or minor, are portrayed accurately, except for one, Captain Atom. In the comics, he is the stern soldier type. Here, he is the biggest douche ever.
Next time, be a hero by remembering you're not.
In fact, for this reason, I refuse to refer to this guy as Captain Atom. Instead, I call him Captain Asshole.
Quite the team you've assembled, Manhunter. Well, except for Batman here.
Say what?
The guy has no superpowers, not even a lame one. And yet, everyone here thinks he's the greatest superhero in the universe.
'Cause it's true.
Boom. You're dead.
He just said that in front of 3 of the founding members of the Justice League. That's like Rob Schneider trying to insult Dan Aykroyd in front of the original SNL cast. It's just sad and pathetic. I strongly feel like there were other douchey characters in this show like Booster Gold and Guy Gardner who would have been better suited for this role.
One punch! One punch!
But I assume that since the creators worked so hard to make those 2 characters likable, then instead they decided to offer up the good captain as a sacrificial lamb. This story, of course, is ridiculously predictable. Captain Asshole eats a big slice of humble pie when he loses his powers to Major Force. Then, right when you think the episode is going to be tolerable, another horrible fucking song.
But only your heart will win us the fight.
I've only been able to sit through this one once. I only recommend it to the morbidly curious.